Alright, so we are looking at how do we measure intelligence. We talked about the different types of intelligence, so now we're going to look at how do we measure intelligence. Early attempts to kind of measure intelligence included relating head size to intelligence. We saw those in the last video, the sizes of the brain. Francis Galton, who was actually a cousin to Charles Darwin, noticed that intelligent people often had intelligent relatives, and so he concluded that to a large extent intelligence was hereditary or biological. Goes back to that larger question in psych of nature versus nurture. A low correlation between head size and intelligence. He used head size as a measure of intelligence, and that was kind of abandoned in favor of using the skull or the brain. But even today, we don't really think about the size of the brain as a sign of necessarily intelligence. We do look at, to a large extent, the idea that intelligence can be biological or inherited. So brain size and achievement, they noticed that there was enormous variation in brain size and achievement. Brain size, there were sex differences, and intelligence all influenced it. In general, too, the brain size, women's brains weighed about 10% less than men. So for a long time, they considered women to be feeble-minded. What they found is that even though the woman's brain weighs less, there's little difference in intelligence between men and women. And that it doesn't matter if you have a very large brain, it doesn't necessarily result in you having any higher IQ score. So perceptual speed, individuals who perceive information quickly have a tendency to do better on intelligence tests. So neurological processing speed is also a bit quicker in that. And what you think is that maybe the idea that speed and intelligence are working together, and there's some type of underlying process that blends those two together. So you see here, long side or left, it says long side on the left or the right. And what they found, they've used this test a couple of times. It's in your book on page 614. But what they do is that the image on the right-hand side of the screen is actually a masking image. So they flash you the image on the left, and you see it very quickly. And then they put the image on the right up very, very quickly. So it interferes with your after image. We talked about that in perception. When you see something and then you move, you may still see it again. So they put the image to the left up, and then they put the image to the right up. And what they found is that people who have higher intelligence levels and can see that more quickly will pick the right side. So then how do we assess intelligence? Alfred Binet and Theodore Simon set out to figure out a concept called a mental age, what a person of a particular age should know. And you're probably familiar with Binet from the Stanford Binet test. They discovered that by discovering someone's mental age, they can actually predict future performance. They hoped that they could use the test to help children, not label them. And Binet would probably be somewhat dismayed because they have used those IQ levels, they have used those tests to actually label kids currently. So Binet's warnings, Binet warned that intelligence tests do not measure your innate abilities or your natural intelligence. Rather, they measure an individual's cognitive abilities. Those things result from both hereditary and environmental factors. He warned that intelligence tests by themselves should not be used to label people. Like, we should not use intelligence tests to label people as morons or average or genius. Rather, that they should be used kind of to assess an individual's abilities and used in combination with other information to make academic or placement decisions about people. So maybe use intelligence tests to place people in like gifted and talented programs or honors classes or AP classes, but that it shouldn't be necessarily labeling people. If you're not in honors classes or an AP class, you're not necessarily a moron. That we shouldn't use those kind of terms to really label people based on these IQ tests. So Louis Terman used Binet's research to conduct the modern-day IQ test called the Stanford Binet test. Terman actually had a group called the Terman Termites. So you could take out a scrap piece of paper, and if you see the formula over here to the side, you put the mental age on top of the chronological age times 100. So an 8-year-old has a mental age of 10. What's her IQ? It's 125. A 12-year-old has the mental age of 9. What's his IQ? Be 75. A boy has the mental age of 10 and an IQ of 200. How old is he? 5. So it's just using that math, which I know I don't like, but you do need to make sure that for the AP exam and also for any quizzes or tests that you have in here, that you memorize, learn that formula over there with the IQ equaling the mental age on top of the chronological age times 100. Yeah, IQ is just a number. IQ is just a number. IQ is just a number. We cannot use it to classify people, and here's why. It doesn't really work well on adults. It's very, very good, maybe for, not very good, but it's good for little kids, but it doesn't really work, because if a 60-year-old man, say here, does well as an average 30-year-old, then his IQ is going to be 50. That just doesn't really work well on adults. I mean, has his intelligence changed when he got older? Not necessarily. It just doesn't make any sense. So maybe it could work with children, 8, 9, 10-year-olds, in that kind of range in school-age kids, but it doesn't work very well with adults. So then you have the Wechsler Intelligence Scale, which Wechsler Adult Intelligence Scale are the WASC, and it's now in its third kind of reproduction. Ages 16 and older, and then there's a Wechsler Intelligence Scale for children who are ages 3 to 16. Both have items that are organized into various subsets, like verbal section and a performance section, and then you get a combined single IQ score. I don't know if any of you, when you were younger, probably in elementary school, if you were in the Gifted and Talented program, to get into it, one of the tests that they administer is called the Colgate. That's what we call it in South Carolina, but it's very similar to the WASC performance scale. So they ask you, a lot of times the teacher will teach you or show you an example of something, and then you will repeat that. You'll repeat that, or they'll ask you to do it, and it's very visual, spatial, picture arrangement type of things, along with verbal things such as reading a passage, being able to identify the main idea. So these are some examples that you can see, that you may see on the WASC 3 subtest. And then here again, like I said, subtests for the verbal scale include information, comprehension, arithmetic, similarities, how are a calculator and a typewriter alike. On the COGAT, they use a lot of analogies. What does audacity mean? So more IQ tests. There's also a California test of mental ability that tests your language and your non-language sections. The Otis Linton mental ability test mixes factors together. That used to actually be administered in South Carolina a good bit in the school system for gifted and talented programs. Emphasizes verbal aspects of intelligence. This is the test used most actually in a neighboring state of Georgia. And like I said, it used to be administered a lot in South Carolina. So how do we then construct our intelligence test? Because again, and I said this in class, but I'm saying it again here, is that a lot of these tests, some of the problems is that they're not, they have some bias in them. So tests have to be standardized, and they have to be reliable, and they need to be valid. So what do we mean by that? If it's an aptitude test, it's a test designed to predict a person's future performance, the ability for that person to learn. So like the SAT, the PSAT, that's supposed to show you how well you'll do in college. They've actually found that your GPA is actually a better indicator of how you'll do in college, but most colleges look at your SAT or your ACT scores as well. Achievement tests are more designed for what a person has learned. So like your AP Psych test is going to be an achievement test because you have studied, hopefully, and you are going to know your AP Psych so that you're being assessed on what you've learned throughout the year. We've looked at this before, standardization. When you look at the Wechsler Intelligence Score, you have, again, the idea about 95% of all people are going to fall within 30 points of 100. So 100 is usually what we use as kind of the average IQ score as well. The test must be pre-tested to a representative sample of people and form a normal distribution or bell curve. So you see that there. That's kind of going back to that chapter on stats and data. You can see here aptitude and intelligence scores where they're kind of clustered around SAT scores, and that's when the SAT was out of 1600. So you also have what's called the Flynn effect, where intelligence performance has been on the rise. And we think that maybe some of the things that account for this, because are people necessarily getting so much smarter than they were in 1915 or 1920? Probably not, but maybe what it does account for it is better nutrition. That we have more education, more standardized education, more stimulating environments. That again, if you go back to Gardner, the idea that, because we're a one-to-one or we have more technology, that you're better able to pick out what you are good in. Smaller families, so you don't have like 15 kids necessarily to all like kind of take after. If you are an only child, you get a lot more attention than if there are 14 other kids in your family. And then also probably more parental involvement. Again, I think that technology aspect is going to have something to do with it. I think if you continue this on until 1990, past that, because I know it's probably a long time ago, but once it continues to rise. This graph's a little old, but the pattern is the same. Is that intelligence continues, our IQ scores tend to go up. But again, I think some of those things that you see on the side over there account for those changes. But that's called the Flynn effect. The idea that we're not necessarily smarter now than we were in 1915 or 1920. But the environmental factors are enabling us to score better on those IQ tests. So then another thing, if we look at standardization and the idea that you've got to have a normal distribution scale, you've got to pre-test it, is reliability. And this is the extent to which a test yields consistent results over time. So what they'll do a lot of times, they do split halves or test retest method, where they might split it into like an A and B section, and they will make sure that those results are consistent over time. That they test it and they retest it and they test it, and that so consistently. It doesn't mean that the scores are going to get any better. It just means that they consistently yield the same results. So that's being reliable. And then you have validity, which is the Okay, so then you're looking at validity, sorry about that, which is the extent to which a test measures what it's supposed to measure. So content validity does the test sample a behavior of interest. So it's things that you can prepare for, like a driver's license test. You study for that, you know what's going to be on it, so it's measuring content that you've learned. Predictive validity is, does the test predict future behavior? So an IQ test may be more of a scale of predictive validity, that it is predicting future behavior, which can work well with certain ages, or like maybe when you're looking at a 6-year-old, sometimes they recruit football, basketball players. I saw the other day where they were recruiting LeBron James' son for basketball, and he's 10. And so you're basing it off of predictive validity, the idea that he is going to be good because his father is good. So content validity is testing like information that you should know, and predictive validity is testing kind of your ability to, what are you going to know in the future. Does intelligence change over time? So by about the age of 3, a child's IQ can predict adolescent IQ scores, which is kind of crazy, but it depends on the type of intelligence. Remember in the unit about development, we talked about the idea that as you age, you have crystallized intelligence and you have fluid intelligence. And the crystallized intelligence is your accumulated knowledge, and that does increase with age. However, your fluid knowledge is your ability to reason speedily and abstractly, kind of create new ideas, new thoughts, and that actually decreases with age. So it kind of thinks about what kind of intelligence are you really looking at. Intelligence endures for the most part when you're looking at, like if you look at IQ scores right there, they remain relatively stable. And we're going to look at this next in the next video, but we're looking at, again, Binet, even though he didn't want to use his test and his IQ test to label people, that's what we use them for now, is to label people, so you can kind of see the distribution of IQ scores, and we're going to start there next time. But if you have any questions, let me know.